Hey everyone, before we jump into today's episode, I wanted to make sure you had a copy of my Quick Start Guide to Health. It's just a very simple 13-page PDF that gives you everything you need from the ground up to get started. It's concise, it's rooted in the scripture, and it'll help you get going. So you can get that at exnihilohealth.com/guide. That's exnihilohealth.com/guide to get started. It's not always a fun thing to bring up, but today we want to talk about cancer, and it's one of the number one ways people die, obviously, across the Western world. And so we want to talk about it. And we want to talk about maybe potentially what are some of the maybe root causes of it? How do we prevent it? What do we do when we get it? And I want to bring on an expert to talk about that, Susan Johnson. She's the founder of the Kick Cancer movement. You get to hear about that in a little bit in the fun naming, but she's a functional nutritional therapy practitioner, and she's helped her young son walk through his cancer journey, which I hope you'll get to hear about. And she's seen him thrive as a result, which has been really cool. And she also hosts her own podcast, Thrive Through Cancer podcast. Susan, thanks for being on with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm excited to share.
You have a cool name. I already told you that, but just for everyone listening, they need to know. That's awesome.
Yeah, and then we had to keep it going. My son's name is Kicker, and then my daughter is Selah. My husband, bless his heart, it's just
Awesome.
Josh. It's just Josh.
Poor Josh.
Yeah,
It's so boring. Well, I'm
right.
Eddie, so I can't complain.
Yeah,
I seem like my name sounds like I should be playing dominoes in a park at 75 years old
that's
somewhere.
awesome. So I didn't think about
Uh,
that, but you're right. That's kind of fitting.
yeah, it's perfect. Okay, so let's start with the story. You obviously been working as a practitioner, and all of a sudden you got a diagnosis with your son, and then you kind of hit the ground running. So let's. I think everyone wants to hear that. So let's begin there.
Yeah. So I had a private practice as a functional practitioner. And at the time, my son was not quite 3 when I had started. He was about 2 when I started the practice. And, ironically, with my private practice, I wouldn't see anybody with cancer. I wouldn't really touch it with a 10-foot pole. It was really intimidating to me. Like cancer, gosh, that's scary. And only old people get it. Like that was kind of my understanding as a practitioner and being naive. And I'll never forget, he started just having these symptoms that were just unexplainable. And, as a practitioner, we tend to get a little bit aggro over like, we just overreact, right? Like, oh, I wonder what this could be. You could kind of go to the point of like no return in your brain. And I was kind of going there because it was just so inconsistent. And so I did all the protocols I knew naturally. And then one day he stopped walking. And that was, he's almost 3 years old. He'd been walking for a year. And I just thought, this is not normal. We took him to a chiropractor and they laid him on the table. He's giggling while they're moving his legs around, like there wasn't pain there. And so I just had this sinking feeling like there's something wrong inside. And I called at the time my mentor, who had taught me a lot about what I knew about health. She was actually my mentor. She was a very well-known practitioner here in San Diego. In fact, I'm sitting in her former office. I own the practice now that she had before. And I called her, and as soon as she answered, I just started crying. It was just like this gut. And she said, "What's wrong?" And I just said, I think something's really wrong with Kicker." She's like, "What do you mean?" And I kind of told her, and she said, "You know what? Calm down. I'm sure he's fine, but why don't you hop in the car?" At the time, we lived in Mammoth Lake, California, drive down to LA and see a colleague of ours, his name's Dr. Moreno. He's an amazing healer. Oh my gosh, Jesus uses that man so much. And she said, "Take him in. He'll check him out, see what's going on." And so we did. Long story short, that visit landed us in the ER. Dr. Moreno, who just has this gift of intuition as well. He said, "I think you guys just let's go to the ER, check in. They'll kind of check him out." And at the time, he knew just intuitively. He had gotten some lab work, but he knew intuitively that this was probably leukemia. Thank God he didn't tell me. I don't know if we would have made it to the hospital. Like, I don't know what, just that. So we get checked in, and I remember they moved us to the oncology floor. And I knew what that meant, and my husband didn't. And he's like, what is that?" And I didn't even like, I couldn't tell. I didn't know how to say it. Like, how do you say, like, my 3-year-old, we're moving to the oncology floor? And then everything just like spiraled, right? And all of a sudden we're sitting in this room with like this white sterile room with all these practitioners and doctors. And I remember our oncologist actually had Asperger's, which incredible that he
Wow.
he was high functioning, just really good at what he did, but he had horrible bedside manner and he couldn't look us in the eyes. And he just was looking
Oh,
down and he said, well, the diagnosis is leukemia, acute, type B, blah, 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 and like saying all this stuff. And I'm like, what's happening? And so we left that room where they gave us their treatment protocol, which was chemotherapy every day for 3.5 years. And mind you, at this point, my son went from breast milk to bone broth. He had never had anything foreign in his body, nothing, like not even children's Tylenol or anything. And
wow.
so all of a sudden they're talking about chemo every day for 3.5 years. And so we stumble back into the hospital room where he is. And at this time I'm texting Kim, who was my mentor, and Dr. Moreno. And I said, okay, we need to get on Zoom and I need to hear your guys' protocol. Like, what's your plan? Because we got this plan and it sounds horrible. So what's your plan? And we get on Zoom and they're just stumbling through their words, which is not like them. And finally it comes out that they're like, Susan, you can't leave. You are now checked into the hospital system. And if your child's under 18 and they get diagnosed, this is your only option. You legally can't take him elsewhere. He has to go through conventional treatment. And I was like, but what if I want to, like, what if I want to? What if I find another doctor here that, like, why can't you guys? And they said, we can't legally, we cannot. And it was just in that moment that I mean, it was like, wait. A, my child has cancer. B, I don't have a choice of what our next steps are. And that, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but really it was in that moment. I wouldn't say it was in that moment. I was pretty numb for a few days and just
I can
really
imagine.
paralyzed. But I do remember coming back to life and it was the Lord, like, Season, like, trust me, this, like, lean in, you have to trust me. And it was kind of that moment of going, okay, you know what? I can't sit back and just be a victim and like cross my arms and watch all these white coats circle around and do all the things. Like, I have to play a role here and I don't know what that looks like. And that's when we just knew we needed to do something different alongside, not do something different because we
Wow.
had to go through chemo, but do something alongside what they were offering.
I cannot believe that. Is it California state law? Is this a federal law? Like your
No, it's
kids are
federal. Well, and people would argue it's in the entire United States as well as Canada and some other countries as well.
so like the entire Western Hemisphere says if you get a cancer diagnosis as a child, that they have the right to treat you however they dictate, and the parent
And
has no say.
they threaten that the child will become foster care, part of foster care, and you'll be arrested essentially for not complying with treatment. And furthermore, and I'm sure we'll talk about this as we get more into the conversation, but now of course we went from having one child with cancer to now thousands around the world that we support. And I can't tell you how many times the parents telling me, like, CPS showed up at our door because we told the oncologist that we really wanted to decline the preventative antibiotics.
Oh
Or
my goodness.
CPS is on the phone because we told them that we were not going to use the formula that they're providing and we want to use our own homemade formula. So it's a nasty industry. However, I will say, let me preface, like, thank God for oncologists. And
Yes.
I don't believe any pediatric oncologist goes to school because they want to screw with families. Like, they
Of
truly
course not.
want to help, right?
Yeah.
They want to help. And I will also say I 100% believe that chemo played a role in my son's journey. And I don't know if
Mm.
I had to choose to believe that, or if I do, I always kind of like, but I mean, I do believe it played a role. And so I'm not anti-chemo. I'm not anti-radiation. Gosh, I'm not anti-surgery. I'm just
Mm.
pro, like, parents have intuition and should have a little bit more freedom in like how they come along their children.
Sure. All right. Well, I don't want to distract from the story. Sorry. I was flabbergasted by what you told me, but yeah, continue with the story and then let's get back. I would love to get back into what, the sort of system of all this.
Yeah. So in that moment of kind of, I call it my defrosting moment when I realized I needed to step up and play an active role. We just started I started researching. Like, my husband would find, he was in law enforcement at the time, and he would leave early in the morning and he'd find me at 4 a.m. on the floor in our bedroom, just researching medical journals and looking at everything I could possibly find. Like, how can we do something alongside of this? And we were told at one point, we actually met with the head oncologist at a very prominent children's hospital here in Southern California through a connection of a former colleague that got us this meeting. And I was stoked. I'm like, okay, we're going to walk into this guy's office. We've got this connection, and he's going to have a different plan for my son. And my first question was, what do you recommend for nutrition for, a child going through cancer? And he just started laughing immediately and said, that doesn't matter. And in those words, my husband grabbed my hand underneath the desk, almost like to hold me. I'm not aggressive. I'm like 5'1", maybe 130 pounds.
Sure.
I'm not aggressive, but he knew, like he could feel that just. So we were told to let him eat whatever he wanted. It didn't matter. We left that meeting just totally deflated. Like, wow. So there really is one standard protocol for every child that has cancer, and none of it involves nutrition. And it's, for a leukemia diagnosis for his type of leukemia, it's literally one protocol, and they just change the dose based on weight and height. And so we decided, okay, we're going to incorporate nutrition. I started studying even more about nutrition. At this point, I'm a functional practitioner, but I never dealt with cancer. And so with the help of Kim, Dr. Moreno, we just dug in and we created a protocol for him. And so all alongside chemo, even when we're in the hospital, we're mixing up, like opening capsules and mixing them in applesauce and raw milk kefir and trying to just get all of these nutrients in him. I have a video I just posted the other day on my Instagram of him eating this homemade chicken liver pate with organic chicken livers. And he was using plantain chips. So we were
Fancy.
literally feeding him superfoods and using gentle detoxification methods, supplementation that wasn't contraindicated with treatment, but allowed his body to still thrive. And so he had chemo every day for 3.5 years. Um, we followed this protocol and changed the protocol up as he changed and as we needed to. And he was not hospitalized one time outside of scheduled treatments. He never
Wow.
needed a transfusion outside of the first 2 days of diagnosis. I mean, he truly thrived through 3.5 years, and now is this healthy, super pumped, strong kid. In fact, my husband and him were at the Stronger Man Nation conference up in Wenatchee, Washington,
Yeah.
this last weekend, and Kicker's 14, and he won the push-up contest for 14 to 17. He did 82 push-ups.
I
And
love
then the
that.
next round for finals, they put a 20-pound weighted vest on him, and he did 62. So the kid is just
All right.
super
Now
healthy.
you're making us all feel bad about our children and their
I know. I'm,
abilities
I'm
now.
like, this morning when I was lifting in my garage, I was like, wow, I'm feeling a little bit weak here.
It's great. That's wonderful to hear how unbelievably he's recovered. Now, when you got the sort of, okay, it's been 3.5 years from like the sort of traditional doctor, and you're starting to get these, tests back, and you're seeing that things are going away. Are you sort of in this state of gratitude towards the sort of traditional doctors, or are you still in this, or are you kind of going, yeah, but like we kind of had to handle all this on the side, or what was your mindset in those moments?
That's a really great question. I was really angry for the first 6 months and just bitter, and like had this spirit of just like, yeah, just bitterness. And I remember going in between our oncology visits, we'd go see Dr. Moreno, and he would work on his body and give him some supplements and pray over him. And I remember at one appointment, he said to me, Susan, you need to let go of this bitterness, and you need to recognize the oncologists for what they do. And you also need to take the pressure off of them for what they don't. And it was this moment where he goes, you realize that medical school is funded by pharmacies, basically by
Mhm.
pharmaceutical companies. They learn one way to treat cancer. They learn how to treat cancer with drugs, with chemotherapy, radiation, all of that. They learn nothing. In fact, nutrition is now in pediatric oncology, it's not even required. So they learn nothing about nutrition, nothing about detox. They learn how to treat cancer with chemo. And he said, so you're putting this pressure on them thinking that they should know this. And while he's like, I don't disagree, I would love medical schools to teach this. They don't know that. And so this is where you as a mom, you need to contend. And then you need to help other moms learn that they can contend for their child this way while they're trusting the oncologist to do this. So it was in that moment, like 6 months in, that I did kind of release that bitterness and go, okay, you know what? I'm going to trust this doctor for what he's doing. And it's important when you're in cancer treatment to really hold a place of gratitude for your oncologist, even if you don't agree, right? Just because that does play, our emotions are play a big role. And so I did kind of let go of that. Although I'll never forget one meeting we had. I think our oncologist was maybe a little older than I was at the time. And Kicker at this point is probably 4. And he like bounds into the office and we sit down to go over labs. And the oncologist has a Diet Dr. Pepper and a bag of hot Cheetos on the desk. Okay. Kicker has a bag of hard boiled eggs and a green juice that we had just gotten from Whole Foods. And the oncologist looks at him and he goes, "What are you eating there?" And Kicker's like, "My green juice and he called boiled eggs rotten eggs. I'm not really sure why. He said rotten eggs and my green juice." And the doctor looked directly in my eyes and goes, "That green juice isn't raw, is it?" Like dead serious. And I was like, "Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't cook it. It's raw." He's like, "That's super dangerous." And I just remember like, Lord, hold my tongue. Because I really
What?
don't want to have this conversation while you're eating
Yeah,
Cheetos and drinking Diet Dr. Pepper. And so there were certainly still moments that just were like super triggering, and I just had to surrender it and choose like everything about our attitude and mood right now is going to affect our son and his healing, right? Like,
that's unbelievable.
so yeah, it was still frustrating, but I did have to change my mindset and trust them and appreciate them for what they did, and then
Yeah, of
realize I
course.
had to take control elsewhere.
What reasoning would a doctor have for the green juice or the green, smoothie or whatever, for that to be like bad for cancer? Like what could he even, what was his logic? Like I don't, where did he get that?
So their logic is kind of based on the Lewis Pasteur theory, which is this idea of pasteurization that came years and years ago to kill pathogens and bacteria. And so there's
Ah,
this big fear in conventional medicine and conventional dietetics that anything raw could potentially carry bacteria and virus.
right.
However, we've found through many, many different studies and research that while that of course is always an inherent risk, but it's the same risk when you're eating processed salami and chicken nuggets in the hospital cafeteria. There
Mhm.
really is no difference in possible contaminants and exposure. We know that the green juice actually has nutrients. And this is also why through integrative cancer treatment, we want to continue to support their immune system gently so that they can withstand an encounter with a pathogen, right? Like whether it
Yeah.
be that from the chicken McNuggets that they're telling you it's okay to eat or the green juice. But it's so silly. It's like taking fire hose to an anthill to be like, yeah, avoid all raw veggies and fruits.
So that there, I guess the logic then is so pasteurized, so that you get like pasteurized milk. So that's like what, like a
Right.
clean, like sanitized, heated milk. That's like, is
That's
my
their yep,
okay,
100% their theory. So back in I'm going to butcher the history of this, but the whole idea of raw milk versus pasteurized milk. So raw milk is how we're supposed to drink it. That's actually
mm,
where all the nutrients are, right? And actually my son would walk in. I have pictures and videos of him walking into chemo, and this was intuitively. This is like his craving with a quart of raw milk kefir. It was like, and there are so many studies showing that raw kefir has incredible benefits with cancer.
wow,
I mean, incredible studies. And I didn't really know, I knew that it was helpful, but I didn't see the studies until years later. But, anyways, so intuitively, he even knew that this was good. But the idea of raw milk becoming now a pasteurized milk and now the world fearing it was because back when kind of we started modernizing everything, right? And cities became overpopulate, just too much growth, too many people moving in. And now you've got these raw dairy farms in the middle of cities, in the middle of these overpopulated areas, and they're milking cows and it's nasty and it's dirty and nobody's paying any attention to contaminants and cleanliness. And so people start getting sick because they're not drinking clean milk. They're drinking milk that should be pasteurized.
hmm
And so people started getting sick. So then we come up with this idea of pasteurization. And, now it's not only that is it safe, but it's shelf stable. We can make a lot more money. Well, fast forward, now we have this epidemic of Crohn's disease, colitis, celiac, all these gut issues. And pasteurized milk is actually more harmful than helpful. And so we do always tell our families, if you're going to give your child raw dairy during treatment, you need to know the source, of course, right? And you need to make sure it is done. It is intended for raw milk consumption. Not all milk, by the way. And like if you go to a dairy farm, most milk is intended for pasteurization, meaning they do not clean. Those cows are filthy. They're knee deep in their own feces.
Yeah.
They're full of pus. Their udders are, I mean, it's disgusting, but they
Yikes.
don't care because they're just going to throw all of this into a vat and heat the crap out of it. And it kills everything, including the enzymes necessary to even absorb and utilize it.
Right.
So that's kind of the theory behind like killing. It's, let's murder it. Let's not just like do it the right way. Let's
Yes.
skip a few steps.
So meanwhile, so the doctor's sitting there going, "Oh, geez, that that green smoothie hasn't, it's not been cooked, so therefore maybe it's not been cleaned, or there's potential for pathogens or whatever, and your son could get sick." And he's got the hot Cheetos, the flaming hot Cheetos, and the Diet Dr Pepper, which of course is very clean, dialed in, like sanitary, all that stuff because of
Yeah,
all of the preservatives and chemicals and stuff.
it's crazy.
Oh
It's
my
crazy.
gosh. That's wild. Okay, so you've I want to ask you about the sort of the state of when someone walks in, like what is this like for them and how you experienced it. I do want to I want to ask about what that's like for somebody. So they're coming in, they're not going to have control over presumably the treatment, but also when they go to the hospital. I know my niece has actually gone through some significant health challenges over the last several years, and she's been in and out of the hospital, and so she had to eat out of a feeding tube for a long
Mhm.
time. And I got a hold of sort of the label on what this stuff was, and she's reacting to everything. She's having allergic reactions to like everything she's eating. But then when she eats through this feeding tube, she's also having flare-ups. Like, well, this is what we give her. And you look in the back of this thing and it's got, your processed oils, your sugars, all this junk, a long list of like several hundred ingredients or whatever in this like mix. And so when you go to the hospital, your kids are getting maybe that, but they're also getting like hospital food.
Yeah.
And there's no control for any of this. And sounds like they're not teaching the doctors any of this either. And so now you're saying, okay, I've got to take responsibility for what my kid's going to eat. Were there like side eyes looked from the nurses and the doctors going, oh, yeah, you think that's going to help the fish oils and your whatever vitamins you're giving them? Is that happening? I mean, it had to
Oh,
have.
100%. It was,
Yeah.
I mean, I would say a lot of the nurses were more open and just so kind and like curious. And you can't argue with what you're watching. When my son would come in for treatment and they would ask us questions and he's like bouncing off the walls and these other kids are sick. They're gray, they're bald, like it's a horrendous experience and sight.
So,
And so we would have people that would question and be like, how is he doing so well? Like his immune system's always healthy. And so, yeah, we would get mostly negative comments and side eyes from doctors multiple times. We're told just feed him whatever he wants. It doesn't matter. And that's where I argue, like, well, do you know what a PET scan is? Like that they use sugar to find cancer, but yet you're telling me he can go eat chocolate cake out of the cafeteria. We had this
oh,
moment where this sweet boy, his name was Luis. I still pray for him. I hope he's still alive. I'm not sure. We lost contact, but he was our roommate when Kicker was diagnosed. He was 7. He was in there by himself. Both his parents worked. They weren't, English was a second language. They weren't really educated on in anything outside of just listening to the doctor and kind of like, sure, whatever you say. And so people were bringing us meals and bringing Kicker toys. And so they started doing the same for Luis. And one day his dad came in and he brought me this thick book. It was like a supplement catalog from 1987 or something, like just this full on, like Sears catalog for vitamins.
wow.
And he said, tell me what I need for him. The doctor won't tell me anything. Tell me what I need. The doctor says nothing. Just mind you, Luis is drinking he's 7. He's drinking his chemo pills with Mountain Dew because that's what the
Oh,
nurses were bringing
gosh.
him. And so his dad, like, just kind of, he was seeing what we were doing over here whenever he came in to visit. And like, what are you doing? You're doing something different. I want to know. And that's when he brought this in. And it was kind of that moment for Josh and I, my husband, to go, we need to get this information out because doctors aren't telling you. In fact, one of Kicker's first lumbar punctures, this is where they put chemo in their spine. They put him under. And you do this like weekly for the first, I don't know, a long time. I stopped counting. So they put him under and they put chemo into his spine. And this is one of the first ones he had when we were outpatient. We were no longer inpatient. And I remember the nurse, when he woke up, he was a little groggy, and the nurse said to me, so our suggestion is to take him to Starbucks or 7-Eleven and get him a Frappuccino or a Coke. And she's saying this, and I'm like, I'm being punked. Like like, there's a video camera in here. I said, are you talking about my son who's 3? And
Sounds
she
like a
goes,
joke.
yeah. And she goes, well, yeah, because this was her reasoning. And bless her heart, again, she's wanting to help, but she only knows one way. She said, well, they get headaches because the chemo often slips in past the blood-brain barrier and gets into their brain. And so they'll get a headache. And so the caffeine is what she says is going to help. And while there's plenty of other options than caffeine, I said to her, I was like, is this the advice, just out of curiosity, you give all the parents? She goes, yeah, usually the parents like the Frappuccinos because they get whipped cream with it. And I'm like, okay.
I'm like, sorry, I'm like flinching as you talk. Like, no, if you're not watching this on YouTube, I'm like wincing at this. I'm
I
not a
know.
doctor. I don't know. I talk to people smarter than me, but that sounds nuts. And like even if it's just the caffeine, like there's even better things
Right.
people I could suggest. Like maybe some like how about a espresso or something? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Like
That's
even
crazy.
just a little sip of black coffee if it
Yeah.
really is the caffeine. But no, and so that is the advice that's given, right? Is that nutrition doesn't matter. But we also know, I mentioned it already, that it's an elective in medical school as it is. And now it's not even there's no required units or credits you get as a pediatric oncologist for doing any nutrition classes.
So they don't think it matters at all. Sounds like at all. Like
Nope.
when that doctor said it makes no difference. I would just say I can't remember if you said it here today or you said it on like one of your podcasts, but give them chocolate cake and fries or
Yep.
something.
That's
Uh,
literally, and when I've posted that story a lot. You
mhm,
read the comments, how many parents say, oh my gosh, we were told the exact same thing.
that's disgusting.
And these are patients all over the world. And, just this last week, I work closely now with families that have a child with cancer. And on one of we call it an office hours call, where the parents get on and ask myself and our functional medicine doctor just questions. And one of them got on and she said, her hemoglobin's really low. Her platelet count right now is really low. We want to avoid a transfusion. And she said, I asked our doctor if there was anything we could do to help naturally. And the doctor said, absolutely not. This is because of the chemo. There's nothing that can help. And she said to me, and I remembered that you've told me we can do organ meats. So,
Mhm.
one of the most important things for kids going through chemo is B vitamins in a methylated form, and then the nutrients like copper and zinc and all of these like superpower nutrients, CoQ10, and you can get that in organ meats. And now I don't know about you, but the idea of like cooking liver and onions makes me a little gaggy.
Not the best.
Not
I've
the
tried it.
best. So there's supplement forms of it. There's even seasoning now that you can get that doesn't taste like it. So there's ways to deliver it into a kid, opening a capsule, mixing it in a little bit of raw honey and applesauce, something, right? And she said, I remembered that you had said this. And so, long story short, she ended up going back the next day, and just in 24 hours, her counts came up by giving this. And she told her doctor, and her doctor
Wow.
said, I think it's just a coincidence. And I think it's because and I'm not going to lie, I have a little ego. I think we all do inherently. We're human, right? We're sinful by nature, and
Yeah.
we tend to kind of go toward ego. And so I say this because I want to have compassion. I think it's ego because it's really hard to unlearn something that you were taught and that you believed for so long. And to have to unlearn that. And then the ego of like having a mom tell you, or having somebody that doesn't have 8 years of medical school behind their belt. It's kind of a punch in the gut,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know?
I get that. I mean, I'm feeling my ego in this conversation. So so food does matter. And so what were maybe what were some of the things you started immediately saying he has to have this, but also maybe even more broadly for families you work with, what are some of like the things you're like, we've got to put this back in them? And I don't want to presume, but it might, I guess intuitively, it sounds like this would work for maybe anybody with cancer, not just for children.
100%. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing too, is like a lot of times people will say, well, this is the diagnosis they have, or my mom has breast cancer, or my daughter has rhabdomyosarcoma, or my friend has a brain cancer. And we have to understand cancer is a metabolic disease. So it's all about the terrain being the soil, like our gut, our body, the health of our mitochondria. And so while conventional medicine looks at cancer like they want to individualize it, right? I'm not smart enough to know cancer genes and to break down, a tumor and like exactly what's happening at the cellular level, but I do understand metabolic disease. And so the way we approach it with nutrition is, how do we fuel the body based on what it needs? And it's really basic common sense. Like, what were we created to eat in general? And now we fine tune it, of course. So for example, if we know most cells healthy cells have the metabolic flexibility to use fat as fuel and sugar. So glucose and ketones. Healthy cells can use both. Cancer cells, not all, because there's different cancers that continue. Now we have super cancers. There's a lot of different cancer diagnoses, but most cancer cells can only use sugar as fuel. They can't use ketones as fuel. So the basic knowledge of that means, well, so you're telling me if it can only use sugar as fuel, if we remove the sugar, that could actually help stop the cancer from being alive. I mean, and if you made it super simple and broke it down, yes. Now, do I think that every cancer patient needs to be on a ketogenic diet? Not necessarily. I think for tumors, a ketogenic diet focusing on whole, nutrient-rich foods can be really helpful. Blood cancer, keto isn't as necessary to be in ketosis, but I would say whole organic food. So every plate, I like to have a bitter green. And here's an example, because most parents are like, my kids won't do this. We love, and a lot of kids love, arugula with organic Parmesan, a fresh squeezed lemon, and a little bit of olive oil. That's like the one salad I can get most of our
Okay,
kids to eat.
there you go.
And so you have a bitter green. You have olive oil, which is a really great anti-cancer nutrient. We like to have a good animal-based protein coming from an organic source. So like a grass-fed steak, wild pastured, game meat, wild fish, and then fat, plenty of fat. The body needs fat, especially in kids, like they're growing, they need this. And so
That's good.
fermented foods would be the other thing we add. We like to have like a forkful of sauerkraut or pickles. Or I always tell the parents, like, get creative. Maybe your child likes carrots. They don't like pickles. Pickle carrots. It's actually pretty simple to do. So fermented foods, animal-based proteins coming from healthy sources, plenty of healthy fat, like butter. We do lots of butter. I recommend butter. And actually there's anti-cancer properties in butter. And
Wow.
so it's just kind of shopping the perimeter of the grocery store, getting organic, avoiding processed foods, avoiding grains, ideally, while you're walking through cancer. Some quinoa here and there can be okay, but really focusing on foods that your body's going to utilize in its most whole form.
So, yeah, like Doctor is it Dominic D'Agostino has
Yeah.
been talking about this for like 15 years, maybe longer. But I got turned on to some of the research that he's done with cancer patients and the ketogenic diet, and you sound like you've heard of him and have heard
Yes.
some of that
Okay.
research.
So he shared, this is one of my favorite, and I apologize. I do not have this. I need to find this study. I need to take the time, go in my Google Drive. I know I have it somewhere. Um, and I've been saying this for a couple of years, but he talked about this study that was done. And this is where, and I've tried to share this with oncologists, again, not out of ego, but out of like, I just had a call the other day with an oncologist. It's another story. We have a mutual client and she just had questions, and I was trying to encourage her to encourage the mutual client to eat better. And I shared this that Dr. D'Agostini did. So he did a study where he had somebody eat the standard American diet. So I think for dinner they had a piece of pizza, a bag of chips, and there was something else, like carbohydrates, essentially.
Mhm.
He measured the carbs, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but you can guess with pizza and chips and probably a soda. Okay. He tested their overall immune system, like their white blood cell count, before consuming. Totally normal, standard. They consumed the meal. He tested the white blood cell count a couple hours after, up to 24 hours after, and it was reduced by over 60%. And so, what this says is that the amount of food or the food that you're eating has a direct impact on your immune system's ability to function. And so,
Yes.
eating the standard American diet will affect your immune system for up to 24 hours and basically cut it in more than half of its ability to function. One of the biggest fears with cancer is getting an opportunistic infection because your immune system is already compromised from the chemo.
Right.
And now we're telling people to go eat whatever they want to eat. And then they get opportunistic infection. They end up hospitalized on an ungodly amount of antibiotics. And it's just this horrible cycle. So he's done some
Wow.
incredible work showing the direct implications of what you eat to the ability of your body to function and to show up in the way God created it to do.
Wow. So I mean, I guess this was why even during COVID, I mean, you think about people that are maybe like capable of getting sicker easier, they're immunocompromised or whatever. If they eat healthier, or if they were eating worse, they were more susceptible to getting sick. And I
Yeah,
guess like a lot of the traditional medical community sort of laughed at that, saying similar things like, well, nutrition doesn't matter. But it sounds like even based on this study, ketogenic diets aside, it does.
it
It
totally
does matter.
matters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's intuitive. Okay, so you're giving your son and you're recommending for other families, you've got a bitter green, something with like a lemon and Parmesan cheese, olive oil, but also high quality fats, grass-fed meats. Are you doing stuff, so also things that are fermented, so like maybe sauerkraut, kefir, but also what about like bone broths? I'm assuming you're doing stuff like that. Any
Yep.
supplements?
Yeah. Lots of bone broth, lots of organ meats. And again, typically in the supplement form, just because or the other way we actually did it, we had our butcher, we ordered half a cow. It's just more economical, anyways, when you're buying grass fed and organic. And we asked them to mix the heart, liver, kidney, spleen into the ground beef so that every time we made taco bowls and burger patties, which we did all the time, that's still to this day like our favorite meals because they're easy. It's mixed in with the organ meat. So it's one of the best ways to get it in. Bone broth. And when we would cook legumes or quinoa, we'd always cook it in bone broth. We'd steam veggies in bone broth. And so just creative ways to get it in, especially for picky kids. So supplement wise, supplements are necessary and can be tricky. And so a few of the like basic supplements that I say most cancer patients need to be on, and this comes back to COVID too, is vitamin D3, K2. We saw during COVID plenty of evidence and research that showed that people that had a vitamin D level of 40 or higher had a significantly better outcome with COVID than those below. And it's the same with cancer. And yet I have to fight tooth and nail to get an oncologist to pull the vitamin D levels in these kids. It's not an automatic pull.
Of course not. And you gotta pay extra for it,
You have
and
to
because
pay.
it doesn't
Yep.
really
Insurance
matter,
is
and it's
like,
vanity.
yep. So vitamin
Yeah,
D is huge. Vitamin C is tricky. There's a lot of it's a argued thing with conventional medicine and integrative medicine. We do have to be careful on chemo days what we're giving, right? So if a child's going in for treatment or an adult, there's certain nutrients that we're going to avoid because we don't want to counter the effect of the chemo. So chemo's pro-oxidant. We don't want to like bring in a ton of antioxidants on the day of treatment. But days before and days after, there's plenty of things we do. And vitamin C can be delivered by mouth or IV vitamin C. That with kids is, again, when CPS is called, if you tell them you're going to go in for IV vitamin C. So I always say, don't just go out and do it. There's things you have to actually check for. And there really is like blood markers you pull to make sure the child can do IV vitamin C. But there's so much evidence that shows it actually helps with chemo.
I can't believe they're calling CPS if you want a vitamin D drip for your kid. There are people that live in the fast food line like 4 or 5 days a week with their children, and no one calls CPS when they're drinking grape soda out of 2 liters and
No.
Sunny D. Like that's when they should probably be calling CPS. It's just such a it's such a, I mean, maybe I'll get a little religious here, but I'm a pastor. But like, um, there's a whole talk on the sixth commandment, which is thou shalt not murder, and part of the Westminster Confession of Faith. A friend of mine, Seth Trout, a pastor, brought up the fact that it talks about the that you have this call to preserve life as a result
Yeah.
of not just to not murder or not kill, but to preserve life on the other side of that with like sober use of food, drink, all that. And so when you think about that from a spiritual perspective, if I have a call to preserve life, not
Mm,
just to not kill, and to avoid what he called suicide by lifestyle, which is this like breaking of the sixth commandment with the slow lack of nutrient and bodily neglect by
yeah.
through consumption. And so if you're going to call CPS, I mean, there's kids with walking around with multiple chronic diseases, overweight, and they're fine. But yeah, I want to get my kid a vitamin C drip, or I want to test their vitamin D levels. It's like, well, hold on a second, whack
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
I don't get that at all. I understand, but excuse me getting a little frustrated with this whole system. It's crazy.
It's so true. It is. It's asinine. It really is. It's backwards. And it's going to take people like you and me and getting the message out there. And even like, again, there's so many good doctors
Mhm.
that if they knew better, I think they would do better. And I always say when I teach families, I always say, like, now that you know better, you have the obligation to do better. Right. And so I would hope for a fact that our doctors would also feel that same conviction of like, okay, I know better now. I have an obligation to do better.
That's really good. So if you're thinking about um, preventing cancer, wouldn't you do like a lot of the same things that if someone had cancer? Would that be too simplistic? How would you think about that?
Oh, I mean, if we look at cancer as a metabolic disease, like what are all the things that we're doing are supporting the terrain. And so that's the disconnect too, is I don't treat cancer. I'm a functional practitioner and I don't have a license. I have a certification. So A, I can't legally treat cancer. The B, I have no desire to treat cancer. I want to actually help the terrain be as healthy as possible and those mitochondria fire so that your body knows how to get rid of disease, right? On its own. God created us with the ability to be so innately intelligent that like literally when people are overweight and they come to me and they want to lose weight, they come in my practice, right? I'm like, well, here's the deal. First, we got to detox. And you're like, what? Well, and they to see their eyes when I say this, God actually created you with such innate intelligence that He knew we probably eventually would be super smart and we would try to destroy ourselves without knowing it. And so
Totally.
toxins, guess where they hide? Fat. They hide in adipose tissue. And so people can't lose weight because they're they're not letting go of the toxins. And so again, like when we think of how we were created to protect, to like stay alive. And God knew. So we have things hide where they need to hide. And so, anyways, the whole idea of creating an environment cancer can't survive in is diet, lifestyle, and of course, emotional health, and then environmental. There's a big thing that we're
Mhm.
not recognizing now of like, what's our environment like? How toxic is our environment? And, I think of things that like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and just that technology. For example, I had a sweet little boy, he's 4, and he has relapsed disease, which means he had recurrence. And so he just went through a bone marrow transplant. And, in my initial conversation with the parents, I gather as much information as possible to kind of find out too, like root cause to disease. Like why, and I don't believe on this side of heaven we'll ever know exactly why our son got cancer. And I'm not in the business of trying to figure that out. What I want to figure out is where are the weaknesses in the body? What's the root cause of disease beginning? And in this conversation, we find out that on this little boy's bedroom wall, on the opposite side of his wall, is the smart meter. So the smart meter is the electrical box that sends and receives the message to the power company. And so that's on the other side of his bedroom wall. On that same wall is a Tesla battery for their solar power. And about 10 years ago, when I was researching this and I was understanding cancer, it was about the time right when my son got diagnosed, that was one of the first things I found was a direct link to leukemia was electromagnetic frequency and battery, like the battery power, magnetic frequency in
Wow.
high concentration. And so at the time we were living at a home and I found out that sure enough, the smart meter was on the other side of my son's wall. Called the power company, which in California, I don't know about every state. In California, you can opt out to do analog, which means they have to manually come out and read it. So that's a huge thing to do. When they came out, they were irritated. The guy like shows at my door, knocks on the door, and he's like, "So you want me to like change your meter so that I have to come out and read it?" And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Can I ask why?" I wish I had this recorded. I said, "My son has cancer." He literally started backing up. He's like, "Oh yeah, okay, this is a really good idea." And I'm like, wait. So we're waiting until we have cancer to decide that's a good idea? Like you were going to be
Yeah.
okay with it if he didn't?" So
Yeah.
I say that because when I think of creating an environment and educating families, like that is a simple fix is figuring out what is the Wi-Fi burden in your home. Unplug your internet when you go to sleep. Don't let your kids sleep with their iPads and their phones and computers in their bedroom. And make sure the smart meters, and I always say you want a dumb house, you don't want a smart house. You want a really dumb house filled with Jesus, but not a smart house. You really don't want a smart house because it's just a burden on the nervous system and there's too many links to disease. But yes, to answer your question, nutrition, lifestyle, and environment all play a huge role into creating an environment cancer can't survive in.
I love your approach and thinking about, okay, like how does cancer, how does it, continue? How is its growth facilitated within the body as opposed to you thinking about it in like silos, okay, let's do this, let's do that. You're thinking about, okay, holistically, let's prime the environment for health as opposed to priming it for cancer to thrive. Like you mentioned the PET scan and the sugar, and it's something to do with sugars being able because they. Why don't you explain the PET scans and understand why the sugar works, and then why that demonstrates that sugar within the body might be a bad thing.
Yeah, this is my favorite conversation to have when people say it doesn't matter what you eat or sugar doesn't feed cancer cells. So they use radioactive glucose. Glucose is a fancy word for sugar. They use radioactive glucose in a PET scan that's injected into the body and then they do the PET scan. And the reason they do the radioactive glucose is because cancer cells uptake sugar 80% faster than other cells. And so you will light up like a Christmas tree. The radioactive is so that you can see it through the scan. You will light up like a Christmas tree where you have cancer when they do a PET scan because the cancer cells uptake sugar 80% faster than other cells. So don't tell me that sugar doesn't feed cancer or that diet doesn't matter. You're literally using it as the Trojan horse to detect it. And then on the other side, we're told it's fine. Let your kid eat whatever they want to eat. And you're just like, am I crazy? Like, I feel like some days I'm banging my head against a wall of just like, I'm not the smartest person in the world by any means,
Right.
but why is this not resonating with these doctors and our medical system?
I love how we can approach it from multiple angles instead of just this one. So what if we could bullet point a couple things. So the things I've heard you say are um, EMFs, so environmental. So maybe perhaps like you got your Wi-Fi, maybe you got a cell phone in your room plugged in, meters, electric, all that different stuff. So we've got that. We've had a couple EMF specialists on the podcast talk about some of those dangers. So EMFs, then you talk about sugar, so potentially ketogenic diets, things like organ meats, really good. Are there a few other things you might bullet point to say these are the things that we've got to focus on?
Yeah, I think one of the big things, and we haven't really talked about it a lot, is detoxification. So, one of the reasons I believe that recurrence is so common, recurrence meaning relapse of cancer. And in fact, if you read a lot of chemo labels, it'll say the number one side effect of not all, but many chemotherapies is secondary cancer. So you can't tell me that in 2025, that's the best that we can do. That's a whole nother topic. But so number one, that's one of the most common side effects of chemo is secondary cancer. However, number two, I think of it this way. I think of it as this. So we're using this really powerful cytotoxic poison to kill the cancer, right? And hopefully it's doing its job. So it's going in there and it's killing the cancer. The doctors tell you don't detox. You don't want to detox during treatment. And you're like, well, wait a second. So I'm putting a poison in my body. It's killing cancer cells. So where do those dead cells go? And that leftover cytotoxic poison, if I'm not helping assist the body that's already weak and clearly not detoxing well, if I'm not assisting it to detox, what's happening? And I can't help but think this is why recurrence is so common because we have this dead tumor waste getting reabsorbed into our cells. And then we have all of this leftover radiation toxicity and chemotherapy that's in our body and not getting flushed out. And so
Mm.
detox is a huge piece of the puzzle. And I will say, you have to do it gently when you're going through active treatment because it's a burden on the liver, right? You have to, especially with
Right.
littles. I have 6-month-old babies and I have 18-year-old boys. And, so there's this big, we approach it kind of uniquely with each child, but detox is huge. And so things like castor oil packs over the liver. I mean, we've seen that single-handedly bring down liver enzymes on a child or help them not vomit every hour on the hour.
Wow.
Detox baths with Epsom salt and baking soda, super helpful. We've used homeopathy that is not contraindicated with treatment, really gentle, but incredibly effective. And homeopathy is so easy to deliver to kids because it's usually in little kind of sugar pellets, is what we call them, or in drops. Um,
Mhm.
and so using these modalities to actually help the body gently push out some of the toxins is is huge. It's so important.
Would you do other, like, more some of the more modern, now they're mainstream, but used to be super fringe things like infrared saunas or anything like that? As maybe
Yeah.
even maybe for adults, I guess. I don't know if it's safe for kids, but do
Yeah,
anything like that?
we totally, we love sauna and we recommend our kids do it. But before you get in a sauna and before you put your kid in a sauna, I always have my families make sure, A, can they sweat? Because a lot of kids get cancer. When I pull a nutrigenomics report, which is kind of their genetic blueprint, it shows me all the different SNPs in their body that could be causing what we call the traffic jam that maybe led to a diagnosis in the first place, which could be poor methylation. Um, they tend toward oxidation, whatever. So when I look at these, I often see that most of these kids that get a diagnosis have the inability to properly detox. And so that leads to often, you probably have seen this as an athlete, the people that just don't sweat.
Oh
That's
boy.
that's real bad. Sweating is like a major part of detox. And so I always, if they get in the sauna, we always start really low and slow. And if they don't start sweating, we get them out and we focus on opening detox pathways before we put them back in. But sauna therapy is so helpful. Um, Red
Yeah.
light therapy,
Yeah.
pooping, like the amount of people that just don't poop every day. And when you're going through chemo, you've got to be pooping every day. And so just using herbs and natural remedies to get kids pooping, I mean, that's a natural detox that God created us to do.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, sauna is amazing.
Yeah. What, PEMF mats?
Yeah,
Um,
I have one right here. I don't know where it is.
nice.
Somewhere right around here. So we didn't use this for my son. I didn't know about PEMF then. But yeah, we love PEMF mats. One of the things that I will say, you and I could geek out about all of the there's so many things and devices and tools out there. And I want a home that I want my cold plunge, I want my sauna, my red light bed, I want all of it, right? And what I find though, as a family walking through this disease, is everything's overwhelming. And
Yeah.
so I'll generally recommend rather than PEMF, and some families are like, no, I want it all. Like, I will do it all. Just tell me. But a lot of families, it's just like a step at a time. And so I will tell them, you know what? I want you to get your child outside barefoot on the ground or in water, in a body of water. I mean, ideally not a chlorinated pool, but like get
Yeah.
them outside, connect to the earth and that fresh air. And that in many cases, I mean, is it as effective as PEMF therapy? Probably not, but is it still helpful?
Right.
100%. So
That's
trying to
wonderful.
make it a little bit simpler for families is really important too.
Of course, yeah, and it can be overwhelming, all these nerdy things. We see people have never heard of them before, and there's no
Yeah.
they don't have any categories for like PEMF mats and know what any of this stuff means. And so but there's all these natural things, right? Like just being
Yeah.
connected to the earth. I mean, like it's amazing how there's like natural healing properties interacting with the environment in ways that God's designed us to that can bring a lot of relief in this area. So I love that. Um, to end our time, I do want to ask about the sort of spiritual aspect of this, and even maybe even some of the mindset related stuff to this, because you always hear things like stress like adds to cancer. What have you seen? You know, sort of in I don't know if it's in conjunction with or it's adjacent to like traditional treatments around things like spiritual healing or even like stress reduction at a basic level, forgiveness, these things like does any of that play a role? Is it helpful at all?
Oh, yes. Here's the thing, this is where I struggle, and my husband too. It actually makes me a little emotional because we just lost another kid this last week. Um, I struggle a little bit still with kids, and these little kids, and I'm like I said, I have a 6-month old that we're helping, and we just lost a 14-year-old that fought brain cancer for 9 years. And I struggle with the emotional piece for them because it feels so untangible. Because what's a 6-month-old to do or a 14-year-old that's like, I'm just trying to be a kid. However, I have learned just even in the last few years of bringing on guest speakers onto my coaching calls with these families. And I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Tony Jimenez, Hope for Cancer.
Yeah.
So you go to his clinic if you have cancer, and I mean, all bets are off if you're not willing to do the emotional work. And he has state of the art treatment center, like the best of the best facility with the best doctors and the best care. But if you're not willing to do the emotional work, he's like, I can't guarantee that you're going to make any progress. And he can't guarantee healing, anyways, right? He's not Jesus. But I do know that there's some powerful therapies. And so here's a couple of things I would say to parents because it is tricky with kids. But man, what we carry as parents is absolutely passed down to our kids, even in an energetic way. And what I mean by that is, your kids, when you and your wife are fighting or just in disagreement, they feel it
Oh yeah.
and they're carrying that energetically. They feel that. Right. And so I always think of it like, doing whatever we can to just as a family be as connected as possible and trying to, when we have to have hard conversations, stepping out of the room. But even deeper than that, I don't know if you've ever heard of emotion code.
I don't think so, no.
It's interesting. Look into it. I'll totally butcher
Okay.
explaining it, but it was written by a Christian doctor. And so it's rooted in faith, and it's this idea of kinesiology muscle testing, which is like the body's lie detector test. I muscle test every day in my office. I love it. It's such a great tool. But it's kind of helping the body release trapped emotions from organs and systems. And some
Wow.
of these trapped emotions are actually inherited from like maternal grandfather. Like
Oh,
it's
wow.
fascinating. And so when you start to understand that trapped emotions are stored in our organs and systems, like what can we do about that? And emotion code is a really passive therapy you can do really inexpensively. It's a book, I would get the book on Amazon. You could learn to do it yourself. Um, that's really helpful. And then like Dr. Tony has walked my families through just some exercises of like parents writing down your trauma, writing it out, talking it out. And like us as parents releasing some of that absolutely can affect and impact our kids. But
It's
yeah,
it's
that's a tough one.
I appreciate your passion, and I'm so thankful that God's placed you to do with the ministry, really what you're doing. I don't know if you've seen it that way, but it's ministry, and you're serving families, and you're helping them walk through very difficult times, and you could see the passion and care that you have for these young people and their walk. And so, the emotional side of all of this, the stress related components, the spiritual component of all this, is so powerful. And so, yeah, I think people should check out Tony Jimenez and some of the stuff he does. But the people that talk, it related to around this issue. So if this, I'm going to put a link for Emotion Code. I don't know what it is yet. I'm going to check it out. I'm going to throw a link on the show notes for people to just explore this side of this whole journey for people, because this is really a large part of it. And it's the thing you face when you close your eyes at night, when your head hits the pillow while you're walking
Yeah.
through it.
And I think the hardest part about it and why most people, and I have to say I'm guilty as well, like is because there's not a pill you can take or a food you can eat or an exercise you can do. You have to do the hard work of dealing with your emotions and
Mm-hmm.
dealing with traumas and dealing with that. And that's hard work because nobody else can do it for you and
Right.
nobody can give you something for it. And so I think that's why it can be such a foundational piece of healing for sure. But I
Come
say
on.
praying over your kids, like we do, I mean, all the time, right? We're just praying over these kids and just praying for total and complete healing. And sometimes that's in the arms of Jesus, and sometimes that's here. But just knowing that, like, I surrender all control. I wish I could guarantee outcomes for families I work with, but I trust someone who does. I trust someone who he knows the days are numbered. And it's the hardest thing to know. Some kids God created them to be here 3 years. Some he created to be here 103. And he has a purpose and a plan. And I quit questioning that because it got really exhausting. And just believing, like, I believe in a God and I trust a God who has the best interests of these kids. He loves them more than I do, and he loves them more than their parents do. And so to just surrender that and remind myself of that, it brings my restless and broken heart kind of back together a little bit more.
You said that better than I could. Season, where can people hear more about your practice and what you do online? Where can people see more?
Yeah, I'm really active on Instagram and I do my best to get back to DMs. So that's just at Susan Johnson. And then our nonprofit is kickcancermovement.org. We'd love to support families through that. And then my private practice is biodynamicwellness.com. We have a whole team of amazing practitioners here. And then I have a ton of resources on my website. I need to really narrow this down. It's a lot of things, but susanjohnson.com, where you can find all kinds of helpful resources and recipes and all of that.
All the links for everything you listed, Season, will be in the show notes for people. So if they want to just go make it easy on themselves and go click through, I highly recommend it. I follow Season on Instagram. A lot of great content. She's
Thank
got a
you.
great podcast. I highly recommend checking all that stuff out.
Thank
Season,
you.
thank you so much for being on. This was a blessing to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course.